Albert Einstein said, "Don't think about why you question, simply don't stop questioning." Welcome to Curated Questions. I am your host, Ken Woodward. And these questions are not mathematical equations, but rather a resource to encounter personal reflection and growth. As Tupac Shakur stated, even the genius asks questions. Now, let's engage the questioning community. Greetings. Ken Woodward here. Welcome back to another episode of Curated Questions. Together, we engage inquisitive humans about how they use questions to navigate and make sense of our world. I am a fellow traveler and pilgrim on this journey, and I'm glad you are here. Today's conversation is with Chaz Scott. His first name is spelled Chazz. After reading The Power of Positive Thinking by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale just before his undergrad graduation, Chaz underwent a self-transformation that radically changed his paradigm of living a successful life. Curiosity and questions fortified this shift to master himself and then influence the world around him, eventually leading to the start of a nonprofit focused on reducing youth mental health stigmas. Under his consulting firm, Supramentum, Chaz specializes in training leaders in well-being, peak performance, and sustainable success. He is the executive director and chief creative optimist of Positively Caviar, a nonprofit focused on using optimism to bring mental health resilience and disrupt youth mental health stigmas in underserved communities. This social enterprise provides experimental mental wellness workshops rooted in positive psychology to provide youth with preventative tools and curb stress and increase well-being to flourish in life. He earned a BS in computer science and an MS in cybersecurity from Hampton University. I first met Chaz in 2019 during my #Year of Connection project. His dynamic charisma immediately captured my attention, and then we discussed the power of our minds over our lives. I have learned much as I have been reading through his book, Success Starts Within, Achieve Your Potential Through Radical Self-Care, which was published in 2023. Chaz, welcome to Curated Questions.
Hey, Ken, I appreciate the introduction. I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much.
So I often like to go back to the beginning for you. And when did you first understand the power of questions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Very early in my life, I started to realize this conversation that exists in your head and how important it is to become aware of that conversation, but finding ways to influence it in a way that's going to affect positive change in my life. I went to undergrad at Hampton University and I studied computer science and then went ahead and got my master's in cybersecurity. From that time period, I had graduated and I was always asking questions to myself, trying to figure out my purpose in life, what's next for me, how to overcome adversity. And I went on this journey of reading every book I could in personal development, neuroscience, spirituality, anything that I can improve the quality of my life. I started hunting for knowledge. And this was a time period where I was actually recently graduated from school, started my first career, managing a nonprofit and a small business. And I was burnt out, depressed, and waking up to a job that was just paying the bills. And I was working harder professionally, but my inner life wasn't getting any better. So I went on a journey of asking questions to myself. And it was very interesting because there's lots of research that highlights the importance of asking questions to yourselves, something called instinctive elaboration, which is this process that when you ask yourself a question, your mind gets sent off into a different realm of thinking and thinks possibilities instead of blockages. And that was the motivation or information that I needed in my head to start thinking possibilities and not blockages in my life.
Wow. Instinctive elaboration. I'm going to have to dive into some more. At that time, had you already started the nonprofit as well?
Yeah, this was probably around 2017. Okay. I think you read in my bio, I had read the book Power of Positive Thinking by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. And when I read that book, that sent me down a spiral of asking questions to myself. What's the purpose of my life? How can I have a happy life? How can I enjoy my life? How can I overcome challenges easier? Um, and during that moment in my life, I started recognizing the importance of mental wellness, mental well-being. And I was like, oh my goodness, we got to give this information to youth, especially in underserved communities in Baltimore and DC. At that time, I had some friends that were interested. So we started it around 2016, 2017, and just providing sort of fun, interactive mental wellness strategies to youth. When we're not just talking at them, we're giving them information, but in an activity-based format, so they can learn how to disrupt negative self-talk, so they know how to use meditation and yoga, giving them things that they can use before adversity happens so they can manage their sort of emotional state throughout life. I wish I had these tools when I was younger. We're just trying to give them to middle schoolers in particular as quickly as possible, just so they have something they can fall back on. And I think in life, I think you and I know, Ken, throughout our journeys in life, there are tools that we've either garnered through knowledge, either through podcasts or books, or we garnered through experience, and we wish we had them earlier in life. But maybe that's the journey, right? But my job is to help people, especially youth, find those resources as early as possible so they can balance their emotional state and live out their true potential in life.
You mentioned middle schoolers. Why target the middle schooler?
When you first start a nonprofit, you're like, I'm going to solve the entire world, everything. You're going to put all your money into it. And I did that for a little bit. And that's when I started to burn out. And I realized when you're at the point where you're trying to create solutions, you have to target a specific audience. And in that case, because I did a lot of study around neuroscience and the brain development, I knew that youth, particularly in the middle school years, their brains are very malleable and formidable. I knew the knowledge that we were giving to them, as well as the exercises, they needed to have a sense of awareness that allows them to take in that information and use it. And this was a particular time in their brain stage of their development where they're actually able to use this knowledge. And then also, to your point of the podcast, right, asking questions to themselves, becoming intuitive, as I mentioned, instinctive elaboration, being able to ask a question and then being able to think as it relates to possibilities in terms of their future. So they're at the stage in middle school where they're able to do that. And we've seen the benefits. We did elementary school and we do a little bit of high school, but the middle school age is just perfect for this fun, interactive space to have conversation, to give them activities, as well as for them to use knowledge in their own way.
Cool. And how do you use curiosity and questions to engage this particular group?
When you're leading workshops like this, you have to ask them questions. You have to realize that you think that you know the answer. You have to understand what they're going through. A lot of the youth that we are targeting in Baltimore and DC, they've had a series of traumatic experiences that have happened to them that affect their learning, going to school, relationships. You have no idea what they're going through. So being able to connect with them just at a personal level is important. And then asking them questions. You can't just assume that you know what they're going through. So there have been many times in our workshops where we're talking about, hey, do you know what negative self-talk is? Do you know the importance of positive self-talk? Have you ever heard of meditation or yoga? Here's some of the things that you can do to help encourage yourself so that you can manage your stress. You can't assume that they know anything, and you also can't assume that you know their story and what they're going through. So you have to ask them questions. And I think that's so important as you develop relationships with youth, not only to connect with them, but to encourage. First, you have to connect. Then you have to be able to give them knowledge or encourage them in some way. Because if you just spill out information to them, then they don't think that you're connecting with them. Life is about connection. And that's one of the things that we try to do in our organization and our workshops.
The picture that came to my mind as you were stating that I hadn't necessarily considered before is that connection perhaps is tilling the ground and adding the fertilizer such that the seeds that you follow in to plant these new ideas can now grow.
Yeah, I like the way that you say that, because I just go back to my earlier statement. Like when you begin to ask questions to yourself, like just what if, right? What if I can accomplish this? What if I can get over this fear? What if I can accomplish that goal? Your mind starts to think of possibilities instead of blockages. And that is so critical in one's journey in life, no matter where you are. Questions are just so important to the brain.
In your book, you've got a radical self-care exercise of asking yourself empowering questions. You're definitely using questions to help readers engage with who they are and to understand some of that self-talk. As you came up with these questions, were these a series of questions that you had used for yourself? Or how was your process for coming up with this list of questions?
Well, funny enough, I had to ask myself questions, right? So throughout my journey in life, when I started seeking resources, I was asking myself questions like, what kinds of emotions do I want to feel daily? What hobbies or passions make me feel excited about my life? What habit do I need to let go of so I can show up as my authentic self? Like these are questions that you need to ask yourself when you are seeking sort of transformation or guidance in your life. And in my own life, I started asking these questions and I pulled some from other resources and books, but many of these have been tailored throughout my life that have encouraged me. One of the techniques I actually researched was asking yourself empowering questions, which is one of the techniques that you just mentioned. I actually found that out through Michael Beckwith, who's an author and speaker. But many times we ask ourselves disempowering questions. Why me? Why does this happen to me? And many times that sends us down a negative spiral in terms of where our lives are. But when you ask yourself empowering questions, such as the ones that I had mentioned and the ones that are in the book, it sends you up a positive spiral of inquiry of where you are in life. Now, I can't lie to you, at first, when you're going through a tough time in life, many of these can be very hard. But I think just knowing this information and just playing with it can really change your perspective of what you're going through. And it's important that people are exposed to these resources to do so.
What was your personal process as you were going through these questions? Was that a journaling thing? How often were you diving into these questions or just ruminating on them throughout the day? What did that look like for you in your journey to get to transformation? And then through that, because there were probably some successes and failure on your part as you're kind of working through this. And then how would you recommend some of the successful optimal techniques for how folks may be able to use questions like that?
I definitely learned a lot. The biggest thing that I did was I had my iPhone and I had the Notes app up. And many times where I had thoughts or questions that I would ask myself, I would start writing them down and reflect on them. And then actually during that time period, even still today, when I ask myself questions, I either write them in my notebook or write them in my notes on my phone and just allow myself to just think about it and sit on it. There's many times in life that you're not going to have the answer to that question right then and there. But the brain and your mind will start to find synchronicities in life, and things will happen in your life where you're like, that's interesting. Where did that come from? Right. So I think it's important to become aware of the sort of conversation in your head, ask yourself questions, write those down, and then pay attention to your life. Once you start to pay attention to your life in relationship to the conversation in your head, you start to find those series of events that make you recognize where you're headed or where you need to go. And for me in my life, I started to quickly gain a meditation practice to slow down. I think a lot of times in life, we're almost taught to speed up, AI technology, new iPhones coming out. We're taught to buy this, we're taught to buy that. We need material items to feel happy. We need to go on Amazon to click the purchase button. Our lives are getting faster. And I think slowing down and asking yourself questions and becoming more aware or inquisitive of your life, paying attention to the synchronicities, becoming aware of your self-talk is really the keys to life. The biggest cheat code is slowing down to speed up. When you're asking yourself inquisitive questions, when you're becoming aware of your self-talk, you start to know yourself. You start to show up as your full self. Even though that may take some time, like it did for me, and even still I'm on the journey, I think it's critical that we take time daily to really sit down and figure out who you are and figure out where you're going. And even if you don't know where you're going, at least you're on the journey to try and discover it. So I think that's really important in a world where we believe that action is the only key to success, where I believe that intentional rest, asking yourself questions, becoming more intuitive with yourself is really the key to set you along that path in your life.
Beautiful. And how you think that it should be done, or the optimal path, if you will. And I use optimal in quotes because there's still going to be multiple variations of it. I guess it's just the intentionality of saying, I'm going to pursue questions and I'm going to find the means, whether, like you say, it's your iPhone, writing them down or whatever. I'm going to engage with these questions, whatever the response is, so that I can find my way through.
Yeah. Yeah. And writing them down, journaling, something that I haven't done in a long time in terms of journaling, but I definitely write them down on my phone, in my notes app. And sometimes I write it down in a notebook. But writing something down really impresses your subconscious mind into asking yourself that question so that you can become more aware. You know why questions are so important? I mean, seriously, in life, like I think when it comes to alignment with yourself and knowing who you are, I use this analogy of a mountain climber. Like, you don't want to work so hard, climb this mountain. You get to the peak of the mountain, right? And you realize you've been climbing the wrong mountain, but not only that, you haven't been enjoying the journey or the process. The work that I'm trying to do is to help people become more in alignment with themselves, asking themselves better questions or empowering questions, so that when they are climbing this mountain in life or on this journey in life, they're able to learn and discover more of themselves and to feel just more aligned with themselves. And that doesn't mean you have to be aligned with yourself every single day. It just means daily you're doing something that is authentically you. An example would be me and you being on this podcast. I love giving listeners tools and strategies to increase the quality of their lives. Like, I'm excited. I love to do this. This is my true, authentic self. For you establishing this podcast, reaching out to podcast hosts, Curated Questions podcast for you, Ken, is something that is showing up as your authentic self and bringing your full self to life to not only make you happy and enjoy the process, but also help others. And I think that is so key to ensure that folks can garner for, in their lives in terms of transformation and where they're going.
Absolutely. And on my journey, it's been this, or peeling the onion, where there's all of these identities and selves that I thought I should be, and others' expectations. And in working with questions, it's been realizing and giving myself permission to pursue whatever the answers are. To your point on this podcast, nobody else is doing it. Nobody told me to do it, but I find great joy in it. So I'm going to do more of that because this is cool.
I think it's as simple as that. It's not simple. I shouldn't say that, but I would say we make it harder than we need it to be. But that's why I feel like it's all about slowing ourselves down, not speeding up, slowing ourselves down. And I think in life, to your point, we live in a paradigm where if we want to be happy, successful, and fulfilled, we need to buy the car, buy the house, get the wife, get the husband, do all the things that we're supposed to do in the societal context and live up to expectations of our parents or just societal expectations. And then you get to a point in life and you realize, am I really living out the true, authentic purpose of my life? And many times for folks, the answer is yes. Many times it's not. But when you start to ask yourself these questions and sort of that emotion rises to the surface of your mind, you got to do something about it, because otherwise you feel like your soul's stuck. Otherwise you feel like you're waking up each day with no purpose. And I've been there many times over my life. And I've always gotten back to this regimen of not only asking myself questions, but a regimen of examining my inner life much more. And there's a quote that comes to mind, which is, an unexamined life is not a life worth living. And when we talk about the examination of one's life, we're talking about asking ourselves questions and becoming more aware of the conversation in your head. And if you don't do that, neuroscience tells us that we live almost 50% of our lives unconsciously, like robots, like habits, right? We're continuing to do the things that we always do and nothing changes. But when you ask a different question, when you start to slow down, meditation, yoga, do those things that you need to do for your personal wellness, you're able to start to see change in your life, change in a way that's more authentically you, to make sure you're going up the mountain that you feel like you need to be on, but you're slowly beginning to enjoy the journey just a little bit better each day.
How do you see self-care and mental health care intertwined?
In the book, I talk about radical self-care, and I think self-care over the past, I would say 4 years, really in the pandemic, has really encouraged a lot of us to take personal sovereignty over our wellness and our body. And actually, when I started doing research on self-care, it really became popularized. Radical self-care and self-care really became popularized during the Black Panther movement, when a lot of folks within the movement, they wanted to obviously create change during that time frame, but they realized the first change that they needed to do was change within themselves so they can withstand the external pressures that they know that they were going to face. So yeah, if you look that information up, it's actually quite interesting, where they use self-care to enhance their resiliency and to enhance their decision making, so they can actually show up as their true authentic self to the fullest capability that they can, and then carry out the mission that they knew that they were trying to do during the civil rights movement. But I think it's really critical, because a lot of times in life, we often assume like mental health is literally a mental diagnosis. And of course, during the pandemic, we know mental health ranges from many different areas. It could be isolation from your loved ones. It could be not enough connection. It could be loneliness. It could be simply not having the right diet, right? Not enough fruits and veggies in your diet. It could be simply not enough exercise. Mental health is multifaceted, and it's a lot of different things that culminate to what mental health is. And the foundation of having great mental health, I like to use the term mental wellness, is taking care of yourself, self-care. And if you know the strategies on how to take care of yourself, you're more able to become more resilient when challenges come. You're able to have emotional stability when somebody makes you upset. And I actually find this in my own life. I typically wake up between around 5:30 or 6. Every morning, I always do a morning run, something to really increase my energy levels in the morning, because they say cortisol is really high in the morning, which is that stress hormone. So that can give me energy into my day, but also to ensure that I'm taking care of myself first. And I also do a meditation in the morning. I think self-care is so important. So this is me filling up my cup before I give it to anybody else. And there's been times in my life through the nonprofit, through the coaching I do, I'm always constantly pouring out to others, but I'm not filling up my own cup, and it's not sustainable. So self-care is critical in maintaining your mental health, but also other areas of your life. There's no way that you can show up as your full self on a podcast if you didn't do the things that you needed to do daily. So for instance, I went running this morning, right? I knew I was going to do this podcast. I knew I wanted to bring value to the listeners as well as to your podcast, Ken. So I wanted to make sure I was filling up my cup first. And for me, filling up my cup means doing an exercise routine in the morning, doing a meditation for about 20 minutes, and cooking some breakfast or something, right? That could be anything, but a morning routine has been critical for me to not only maintain my mental health, but set me on a path of continuing to explore who I am and this journey in life.
Yeah, you definitely are an advocate of the morning routine, whether it's been through our conversation or what I've seen on social or in your book. You've become passionate about that. Was it just trial and error for you on building your morning routine?
Yeah, lots of trial and error. It's so funny because there's so much information out there. Sometimes it's too much, especially in the personal development space. But I listened to a lot of podcasts and started researching sort of people who had morning routines. And a lot of them, either through Navy SEALs, waking up at 5 a.m., David Goggins, who's an ultra marathoner, he always wakes up at 5 a.m. There's a series of people that have like morning routines that I was like, you know what? They look happy, fit, and successful. That's what I want. Maybe I should adopt their habits so I could have the same results. When I went on that journey, I started to figure out like what works for me. Many people that have a morning routine, it's what I like to help coaching clients with is mental growth in the morning, whether it could be reading or a podcast, something for your physical health, right? Exercise, and then something for your spiritual health, whether it be prayer or meditation. So those are like the three big buckets that I like to guide folks. And for me, I know as soon as I wake up in the morning, I am so tired. There's no way I'm going to pull out a book and start reading because I'm going to fall right back asleep. That was the trial and error. When I wake up in the morning, I'm like, okay, I need energy. So first thing I do is put on my shoes and I go for a run. I got to do something that can energize me. So I know that works for me. And then after that, I do a meditation and then maybe some reading or a podcast afterwards. But yeah, it's definitely trial and error and figuring out what works for you. But I have a lot of coaching clients who are like leaders, entrepreneurs that are trying to take charge of their mental, spiritual, and physical health in their lives because they're burnt out. They haven't necessarily, maybe they've ran across some of these tools or strategies before in terms of a routine, but they haven't implemented them yet. And they're looking for a coach to help guide them to really take ownership of their lives. And, you know, in my process of a morning routine, I remember the first time I started doing this, it completely changed my life. And the reason why that was because I felt like I already won at 8 a.m. I already won the day at 8 a.m. And Tim Ferriss, who wrote the book 4 Hour Work Week and many others, he says, if you win the morning, you win the day. And I said that to myself a lot, but when I actually did it, it really did make me feel like I already won the day. It made me feel more resilient, more energized. Not only are the endorphins and the dopamine surged in the brain in the morning and carries with you throughout the day, so you're in a better mood, but you're able to think more clearly. I'm able to write emails more efficiently and effectively and just feel good throughout the day. I think a morning routine has been transformational for me, and I hope I can provide those resources to others.
Appreciate the encouragement. What questions have you found that are underutilized?
There's a few. One that comes to mind is, who am I? It's a question that I think we as humans always ask ourselves, but we need to ask ourselves more. And the reason why I say that is because we're not just one person. We're not just this person that shows up every single day and we're the same person every single day. The reason why you and I both know that is when we're around certain people, we wear a different hat unconsciously. When I'm around my parents, I'm wearing the hat of a son. When I'm around my wife, I'm wearing the hat as a husband. When I'm around my friends, I'm probably goofing off and being a friend. And then when I'm doing mental wellness workshops for youth, I'm ensuring that I'm providing empowerment and resources for youth. So I'm wearing a different hat there. And I think in life, we need to consistently ask ourselves, who am I and how do I want to show up where you are right now? Because there's many times in life where there may be an opportunity for you to show up differently than what you thought that you were supposed to. For instance, you and I both live in the DMV area. If you're driving on 495 and somebody cuts you off in the middle of traffic, you need to ask yourself, how am I going to show up today, right? Am I going to get pissed off, flick the individual off, make myself get upset, and allow this external event to influence how I feel internally? Or am I going to give myself patience as well as that other individual, recognize that they're probably in a rush. It has nothing personally to do with me. Maybe they have an emergency, or maybe they're just having a bad day. So I feel like asking yourself questions, who am I and how do I want to show up every moment, is so important. Whether you're on the job, whether you're a father, whether you're a husband, how do you want to show up and who am I? Because we are not just individuals that say, this is who I am, this is how I'm always going to be. The real important thing to this is we change and wear different hats when we're around certain people and when certain things happen. So I think those are critical questions.
Are there any particular questions that you carry with you and revisit?
Those two right there. Who am I and how am I going to show up with myself? As a leader, I think it's a question I always have in the back of my mind is, how do I want to show up as a leader in my job or in the nonprofit? Do I want to be empathetic? Do I recognize when somebody's going through a struggle and I can encourage them? How do I want to show up as myself? How can I show up as my true, authentic self daily? So I think those questions are extremely important. And we should be asking ourselves those questions daily, because life is a daily journey and we need to continue to stay inquisitive. We need to continue to do self-inquiry. When I started to develop a meditation practice, and meditation means to become familiar with, you become more familiar with yourself, you start to understand yourself. You start to become more aware of yourself. And when you become more aware of yourself, you start to able to recognize that conversation that's reinforcing the habits that may not be encouraging you where you want to go. And you start to recognize how you want to show up as yourself. Because I said 50% of our lives are totally unconscious and most of them are habitual. We need to ask ourselves questions to break away from the habits that may not be influencing us in a positive light. And I think those questions have been like so important for me.
What kind of questions would you use, maybe with your coaching clients or yourself, to help you break out of my normal track of this is who I am each day and it's hard, or I'm not showing up as the person that I would want to be? Any particular questions that you found helpful to really bring about change that way?
At a deeper level, when we ask ourselves questions, even if we don't know the answer, I think we're on the right path. I used to watch this movie called Deja Vu. Denzel Washington's in it. I used to watch it over and over again. But in the movie, he becomes an agent and he's helping to identify an attack that happened in a boat. And they have this futuristic time machine and they're trying to recreate the scenes of how this bomb got on a boat. Anyway, the point of why I bring this up is because Denzel says this line where he says something to the nature of, in order for me to have a question, I have to know something first. And that sat with me, because when you ask yourself questions, you're already on the path. You're already on the path because you know something that's either missing or something that you need, and you're already on the path. So I think when you ask yourself a question, you already know that you're on the path that you need to be on. Even if we don't know the answer, there's something in you that you know that is either missing or something that you need. And I think that's critical. So I just want to make that point there. As a coach, there are questions where I say, if you were to show up as your highest self, if you were happy, healthy, wealthy, and all the things that you could be, what would your wisest self say to you right now in this situation, right? And that sort of just changes your perspective of where you are in life. I think those questions are important. Those are the questions I give to my clients, because many times we have the average of 60,000 thoughts in our head daily, and many of those thoughts are negative. In our lives, we're always thinking about this or that. What if this happens? What if that happens? But if we stop and gain clarity of where we are and where we want to go and what our highest or wisest self say to us, it changes our perspective. And I think in life, we're always waiting for the right opportunity. I need to get this amount of money in my bank account before I can do this. I need to feel this way first before I can accomplish this goal. I need to get this watch before I can feel like this internally, right? There's like these things, this conversation that exists, that it's always, I need this first before I can feel this. And I think when you ask yourself, what was your wisest self say to yourself right now? Or what was your wisest self do in the situation that you are right now? It says, I have everything that I need internally. Now, if I have everything I need internally, then I can start there and start to rectify and figure out what the next best step may need to be for me.
Beautiful. One of the thoughts that flickered through my head is that questions can help us interrogate the tape that's going on in our head. Or as you said, what would my best self say, or my wisest self? Then if we're playing with them on a regular basis, can help interrupt that a bit and go, oh, hold on just a second. Maybe you don't want to do this, or maybe you can handle it this way. So using it as an interruption technique.
And I agree with that. You bring up something very valuable, Ken, is in the mental health space, in terms of disrupting negative self-talk or becoming more aware of your self-talk, they have strategies that allow you to challenge your thoughts. In my book, in chapter, I believe 4, it's called Affirm Your Self-Talk, it discusses a strategy in the book called Disrupt and Affirm. It's three steps, which is become aware of your negative self-talk, because many times we have no idea that this running script is negatively affecting us. Number 2 is to challenge your negative self-talk. And then number 3 is to affirm yourself. So number 2 is something that you made me think about in terms of challenging your negative self-talk, or the conversation that's existing in your mind, because many times we don't often realize that not every thought that we think is true. It can be completely made up, either imagined or totally just out of this world. And I think it's critical that we sit time to rectify and recognize, to your point, we do need to challenge the thoughts that we have. And there are techniques from a cognitive behavioral standpoint, some of them in the book and settings where they do therapy for mental health, to challenge your thoughts. And to your point of asking yourself questions, that is a strategy to challenge your conversation and disrupt it in your own mind. And I like to think of it like this, right? Like, your self-talk is ultimately influencing your destiny. So thoughts, actions, habits, character, and then destiny. This is a framework that I talk about. So our thoughts influence our actions. Our actions daily become our habits. Our habits are our character, and then ultimately influences where we go in life. And if you begin to change the conversation in your head, either through questioning or becoming aware through meditation, even exercise is a great way to change the conversation in your head to create change in your life. And if you begin to change that conversation in your head, your life changes. Thoughts, actions, habits, character, and destiny. And I think your critical point of challenging that conversation in your head is just so critical through in anybody's life.
And you just mentioned in that flow that you've got, that your habits create your character. And I hadn't considered it, or hadn't heard it stated that way before, where Because oftentimes we'll say, oh, it's a character issue. If we notice a flaw in someone, we'll say, oh, yeah, that's a character thing. But to trace it back to say that the step before that that's driving that character is just the habits. I hadn't considered that before. But to think about it, it's like the habits are that's going to drive what we do on a normal, in any situation, right? That's what we're going to default to. It would just be our habits. So therefore, yeah, the fruit of the habits become characters. That's quite the connection. I appreciate that.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, because when you start to study this material and study yourself, not only does this bring you to a deeper realization of who you are, it actually helps you to understand others. And you have more empathy and compassion for people that may have a different belief system than you. You may have more compassion, empathy for people that think differently than you, because you recognize that they are simply a product of their own experiences in life. You know, when many people face a traumatic event in their lives, and I think I'm 31, 32 now, I think when you become 32, you at least have probably two traumatic events that happen in your life. As you get older, they continue, right? Often that either disrupts the conversation in your head, and then also influences sort of your habits or your character or the way that you think, right? Or the actions that you take in certain moments in life because of what happened to you previously. So I talk about the process of mental conditioning, and I discuss the importance of your thoughts, actions, habits, and character and destiny, and realizing that most of our lives are happening through this process. And if you don't take time to discover it or change it or start to recognize it and disrupt it, it'll continue to influence you. A quote that I have at chapter 3, the first part of this book is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate, by Carl Jung. And I love that quote because a lot of the things that we've talked about, right, our habits and our conditioning in life are very unconscious, almost 50% of that. But until you can make it conscious, either through meditation, either through breath work, either through asking yourself great questions and discovering yourself and challenging yourself, you start to bring that unconscious self-talk or that unconscious conversation in your head to the surface, and you're able to direct your life much more effectively, or at least observe your life more effectively to try and create change. But if you're constantly sleeping and not able to become inquisitive, you will call it fate, and you may not recognize that it may be an unconscious habit that you have or developed over time. And even through reading books, like I see all the books that are in your library. Books are a great way to enhance that capability within yourself to create awareness in your own life. When you read a story about somebody who's went through a traumatic event and there's inspiration there to help you in your own life, you start to ask yourself different questions. And you're like, wait a minute, if they can do it, I can do it too.
Yeah.
Right? Or somebody, wants to start this business and, they lost this, they lost that, and you're in the same predicament. You start to ask yourself different questions. You start to see yourself in their story, and it changes the conversation in your head. And then it ultimately changes the trajectory of your life. So books, podcasts, just having conversations, becoming more inquisitive, meditation, yoga, these are practices to change that conversation in your head, to change your fate, and to change where you're headed in life.
In reading the stories of other people who have accomplished things, there can be a couple different ways that could go, where I can read it and go, wow, they're amazing. Look at what they did. But the self-talk is less about, that means that I can do it. And this is probably more helping me understand the world and me. But I see them as a success of what they've done, and less about that, oh, I can use those same principles. I can build those same habits or character. What would be a helpful tool whereby if I read that book and I'm like, oh, yes, this is something that I could replicate. And this isn't necessarily that I'm going to get Michael Phelps's upper torso. But what is that self-talk, or what are the questions that I might say to help me get into the headspace to go, okay, I read this. Now, that is achievable for me. It's not just achievable for everybody else out there.
Yeah, I can't think of a specific question that comes to mind at the moment, but I think oftentimes we don't give ourselves credit for the inspiration that may bubble to the surface when we read an inspirational story. It often changes the conversation in our head pretty quickly. And there's certain stories where I think oftentimes where we see somebody who's like super accomplished, or we separate ourselves from that individual and think that we're not them. But I've read a decent amount of stories and biographies of accomplished men and women. And one of the things that I've seen and recognized is they're just like us. And they have stories, traumas, adversities, and things that they had to overcome in their lives, in their stories and biographies that often aren't in the newspapers or on social media. So when you begin to read sort of somebody's entire story or hear some of the things that they've went through, it really grounds you in recognizing that they have challenges that they had to go through that often may be similar or maybe a little bit different than what you're going through, but can help change that conversation in your head and encourage you. I'm at a point in life where I don't take a lot of information face value. I always try to do my own research and ask myself a better question. Maybe one question that comes to mind as I think about this is, after you read a book and it maybe changes your perspective of a challenge that you may be facing because they may have experienced the same one, maybe you could ask yourself, what's the impact of this book to me? Or what clarity can I see that I've gained from this book? I don't think the question has to be like very cut and dry and specific, but I do think that, spending time and reflecting on somebody's story and how that story may inspire you is often the only thing that you need.
Beautiful. I've started this concept called Right Now questions. And these are the questions that are different than what am I going to have for lunch, or who am I going to marry if I'm going to get married and such. But they're the questions that each of us individually are actually working through right now. So what are your right now questions, or questions that you're working through currently?
So I think a huge question for me is, what's next? I feel like I'm at a point in my life, I think we're all in stages of change, in transformation every single day. Particularly for me, I had just published my book, which took me about 2.5 years to write. That had been my focus for many years. Now I'm doing speaking engagements and podcasting as well as coaching. But now that the book is out, I'm trying to figure out what's next in my life. And then not only that, this time last year, I had a back injury where I couldn't even walk. I had an L5-S1 disc herniation. So I do a lot of decently mileage runs. I used to do long distance runs like 50 Ks. But when I fell in Great Falls, Virginia, doing a trail run July of last year, and the week after that, I shouldn't have done this, went ahead and ran 6 or 7 miles after that. And I started to develop this sciatica pain. And for those that don't know, sciatica pain is nerve pain that extends down your leg, and it's super uncomfortable. You can't even sleep. I ran 6 or 7 miles after I had fell the week after, and that pain started to turn into that nerve pain the next day. And anyway, during that process of probably close to about 7 or 8 months, I couldn't even walk, had to get the epidural steroid injection. I was in a lot of pain. And I think through that process, I started to have empathy for folks that are in chronic pain, because it's literally the only thing that you're thinking about. So when you talk about thoughts, actions, habits, character, and destiny, the only thought I was thinking about daily was how to remove pain from my life. And chronic pain is something that I don't wish upon anybody. For those that have already experienced it or are experiencing it, I know what it's like. Anyway, I share all that to say I'm back to running daily, but there was a long time where I couldn't sit and meditate. I couldn't run. And those were sort of foundational habits that I recognized that allowed me to show up as my authentic self. So I had to rely on other things to do that. But now that I'm getting back into this space of what's next for me, I'm trying to figure out what's next for maybe another book or my next race coming up. In terms of, I like to challenge myself physically. I just ran a 10-miler last Sunday, the Patriot Run. The race ended in front of George Washington's house. Nice. It was beautiful. But recognizing like what's next for me is critically important because I always want to challenge and grow myself. But I do believe over the past year, it has been extremely challenging. And I'm getting into a space of what's next and how can I not only allow myself to grow, but how can I help others at the same time, whether it be through my nonprofit, the workshops that we do, or even challenging myself physically.
I'm sure that you will find something amazing to latch on to as far as that next goal. That'll be good to see what you're going to engage with or what that looks like. You mentioned through that journey that one of the things that you definitely gained was the empathy for those with chronic pain. Any other thoughts on how to develop empathy?
Any other thought? Honestly, Ken, I can speak from a personal experience. Empathy and compassion for others, and even yourself, really comes from experience in your own life. In my own life, I never really understood what chronic pain was until I experienced it. Now I understand. In my own life, I never really understood the mental pressures of the importance of mental health and taking care of oneself. Now I understand because I've went through it. So I think oftentimes empathy and compassion comes from experiences in your own life. And then even though the experience may be different, what I think is critically important is you start to recognize when those experiences happen to you, you start to have much more compassion and empathy for yourself and for others because you recognize that there's a series of things that you have not experienced or not experienced yet, but others have. And you have to show up as your best self, encourage others when you can, and recognize you will never have it all together and you will never have everything that you always want, but you want to make sure that you're able to help others and no matter what they're going through, because I think everybody's struggling and battling something in their lives. And because you've went through it, you recognize that others people have as well or continuing. So it's important that you have compassion, empathy for yourself and for others.
Appreciate that good word. Thank you. I want to be sensitive to time, so I want to make sure to be able to get you going on to the rest of your day and helping to change the world. Do you have any other thoughts or encouragements about questions that we haven't touched on yet?
I don't think I have anything specifically as it relates to questions, but I guess one comment that I'll say, if anybody has listened up until this point, I think the biggest thing that I want to give to listeners and folks is giving them hope and encouragement for the future. Many times in life, we often aren't able to ask the right question or may not even know the resource that we may need to change a particular circumstance in our lives. But I've always found that if you seek those resources will come to you, whether it be a family member or a friend or a particular book that you may need right in that nick of time. I think it's important to continue to ask yourself questions daily so that you can show up as your true, authentic self and recognize that we're not always going to have the answer to every question, but also recognize that if you continue to ask yourself questions, you'll continually be led to opportunities as well as a journey that's right for you. and only you. But only you can ask yourself those questions to actually encourage that journey. And if you don't, you're operating in a habitual pattern that may not be reinforcing who you want to become. So asking yourself those questions will set you along that journey to help you go where you want to go. And even if you don't know where you want to go, at least you're on the journey. I always think of it like this in life. When we don't know where we want to go or what goal we want to accomplish or who we are, just take the first step. Think about it in a car, right? In a car, when it's totally dark outside and you have the headlights on and you're driving down the road, the headlights can only see 200 feet in front of you. And as you continue to drive the car, the headlights will see 200 feet in front of you again, 200 feet in front of you again. So you just take the first step, just hit the gas just a little bit, and then you'll be able to see the next path for you on this road. You don't have to see the entire road. Just see 200 feet, just see 1 foot, just take the first step, and then your path will start to open up. But that really starts with asking yourself questions, becoming more inquisitive, meditation, yoga, breath work, reading books, listening to podcasts, seeking resources, just having a great conversation. Anything just sets you along that path to do so.
Appreciate that encouragement. Where is the best place for folks to engage with you, learn more about what you're excited about, and just see what you're up to?
Yes, I'm on social media platform. My handle is Chaz, Chazzc, Scott. Instagram and Twitter, probably on Instagram more than anything else. My book, Success Starts Within, Achieve Your Potential Through Radical Self-Care, is at Barnes & Nobles, Busboys and Poets, of course, Amazon. You can find that book by going to chazzscott.com/book. And you can actually find a free chapter if you sign up for my newsletter on my website as well. But feel free to connect and hope to chat with some of you soon.
Well, Chaz, thank you for sharing your positivity and providing concrete examples of how questions, self-care, and mental health work together. So thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Really appreciate all the work that you do.
And to those on the other side of the speakers, I'm grateful you are here. Chaz encouraged us to take self-care seriously as a means of living well and becoming our best selves. Today is a good day to start or continue this work. The show notes will include everything we discussed, the links to engage Chaz, and the resources discussed. For all of us, please take all you have learned here and be a light to yourselves and those around you. Gratitude shout out to Beauty Pill for the show's music and producer Ben Ford for the technical help. This episode was recorded on Piscataway land. Please engage with this episode in some manner, download, follow, save, like, share, or comment about something that resonated. And please tag Chaz in any of your social media posts. This action ensures we are engaging the questioning community. Until next time, keep questioning.